Thank you. Thank you again for the invitation to be part of this consultation. As we look at the whole area of innovations in the social sector, I don't want to start with any existential arguments for the 2 million or so NGOs that exist. I'd rather get straight into the topic. And I'll take over from what Dr. Prasad had mentioned in the context of innovation. He said there is something which we understand is innovation, is invention, and that at some point invention becomes innovation. So for me, looking at it from the perspective of the social sector, very clearly what I normally call invention is what I call creative output. Organizations deliver a fair degree of creative output. But for creative output to become what is truly innovative, what it requires is a certain degree of scale, where it can scale up, where it can get used in a very large, in terms of it being very large scale in terms of usage and practice. Innovation, therefore, for us is not an end in itself, though innovation is necessary for us to keep staying in and doing what we are doing. But clearly, I would look at three areas which are critical for even the social sector when we look at the whole issue of innovation. One is increase in revenue. The second is reduction in our costs. And third, and probably most important, is how do we improve our program effectiveness, whether it's doing things on time, within budgets, and meeting the targeted outcomes with the desired quality. So these are critical from the point of view of innovation. I'll just talk of a few products, again, from the World Vision context, in which we think that this innovation, which started within the work that we did, has resulted in a high degree of scale. The first is a very, very basic core product that we have, and that is a product called the sponsorship product. I'm sure those of you who know about World Vision would know about the sponsorship product, and that is really about sponsoring a child. World Vision is one of the pioneering organizations which has globally used this product. So there was this question of global and local. We have adapted it for our local conditions as well. So it's truly, in one sense, a global product at this point. World Vision is an organization which is child-focused and exists for the well-being of children. We are assessed in terms of how well we do by how the work that we do results in child well-being outcomes in the communities that we serve. So child well-being is defined in terms of children enjoying good health, children being educated for life. So it's not just about going to school, it's also about quality of education. It is about children being protected and safe from exploitation, and children growing up in a community that is resilient and which allows them to grow to their full potential. Sponsorship is the core product through which World Vision seeks to deliver this objective. In terms of scale and size, World Vision globally has revenues of about $2.5 billion. $1.5 billion is raised through the sponsorship route. Now, the way we work is that we work in what is called an area program. Each of the area programs normally would cover 1/3 of a block in a rural area. So that would mean a population of 40 to 50,000 people, about 40 to 50 villages. What we do is we select about 3,000 to 3,500 of the most vulnerable children that you can think of in the community. And this vulnerability is defined, first of all, economically. So we have a wealth ranking exercise by which the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor in that community are picked up. The second, of course, is a preference for children who are orphaned, children who have single parents, particularly single mothers, children with disability, girl children, and children who are otherwise excluded. So these are part of this 3,500 children or so. Now, these are not selected just by us. It is selected in active consultation with the community so that there is no problem in the way this entire exercise is undertaken. This equally is done in active collaboration with the district administration and the block administration. So there is, in that sense, a public-private partnership in an informal manner that exists in the way we start our work. So we make these promises in sponsorship of health, education, protection for children, and also for the families, particularly families who have no assets at all. The parents of the children who are among the poorest of the poor would have certain livelihood options, and that would enable children to go to school, to have access to good health services, and thereafter, and so on. And all this is delivered within the social milieu of community. So it is in one sense community development with the child being at the center of development, where the benefits translate from sponsorship to individual benefits for the child, to benefits for the family, as well as to benefits for the whole community. So if one were to capture the essence of this product, it is sponsor a child and transform a community. That's really what this product does. And what it gives us is a very dependable source of funding for 15 to 18 years and enables us to stay in a community for a long period, continuing to deal with the different issues that are critical for the community, starting with very basic issues, going on to critically more behavior change kind of issues as the development process continues in the community, allows us to stay fairly long term. It's fairly complex because of the programming and the sponsorship requirements being put together, but we have over the years managed to translate this into a very, very fine art, so to say, and enabled very, very strongly by the use of very cost-effective technology. And what it gives finally is not a community that is dependent on us, but a community that will sustainably look at its own self in terms of going ahead in the future, because we will eventually exit the community, and the community takes responsibility for continuing to move ahead. But there is in this process a journey from abject poverty to a point of sustainability, and sustainability entirely at the level of the community. And it is this sponsorship product that actually enables us to do it. So I would look at the whole sponsorship product, sponsor a child, transform a community, as one of the very significant innovations in the development sector. If I make my presentation a little more innovative, I have some sponsorship forms for those of you who are interested in sponsoring a child. The second area where we have seen in the area of improving program effectiveness in recent times has been in the district of Bilaspur. And we picked up the block of Bilaspur within this district and looked at how it is that we can work at reducing the level of malnutrition within Bilaspur district. This was a project that we did with funding from UNICEF, and it is based on the premise that the first 1,000 days of life are the most critical for any human being. And this is the time from the period when a child is conceived in the mother's womb and the time the child is 2 years old. This is one of the most important stages of development. The bulk of brain development actually happens during this period. And any malnutrition or any less than adequate nutrition for the mother and child actually results in permanent damage for the child, which no amount of remedial education can make so much of a difference thereafter. And therefore, this focus on the first 1,000 days of life is important. So what we try to do is to look at the key government players who are involved in the system. So there is within the health system, the A&M, who is a very critical point where the pregnant mother and the young child need a whole series of interventions during this period. There is the ASHA worker at the Anganwadi, who again is involved in the feeding of both the pregnant mother, the mother with the young child, and the child himself or herself. So there are these two very key pivotal players in this whole system. And so rather than try and solve the problem ourselves, how is it that we, together with the government and together with the government system, strengthen the system in such a manner that this whole process of caring for children in the first 1,000 days of life becomes a very sustainable activity thereafter. And so we looked at 4 different groups who needed to be constantly targeted and be in touch with. So there's a standard global model called timed and targeted counseling. So it is pregnant mothers. They have one group. So there's a group of pregnant mothers who comes together, and there is the A&M and the ASHA worker who are constantly in dialogue with them through this whole process of them meeting together regularly as a group. So all the issues that need to be done in terms of feeding, in terms of iron tablets, in terms of various kinds of nutritional behavior are dealt with at that point. The second is when the mothers of young children. So exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, feeding them colostrum in the first hour after birth for the child, making sure that the child goes through the immunization routine for the first couple of years. All this is very, very, very critical. And there is this group which deals in and talks about this as a care group. The third is to bring other influential players into the system. And this is where the element of innovation comes in. And that is bringing in mothers-in-law into this whole conversation. And so this is called the Dadima group. And so there is a Dadima group which actually is also interacted with. And they then become part of the whole process of the child's development for the first 1,000 days of life. Finally, of course, you can't exclude the husband. And so for the husband, and targeting the husband, because husbands are usually out at work in the day, and you can't meet them in groups, there was a model that we used, which called it the Hanuman model. So there were these catchy names, Dadima, Hanuman, which enabled that all the key players of influence are able to contribute to the development of the child in the first 1,000 days. So this is one example of successful implementation done entirely across the district of Bilaspur, and which we are today scaling up in the 60 districts where we are focusing on the whole theme of malnutrition. The third that I will talk about is a model which is called the men care model. For those of you who are familiar with the whole process of development, you would know that women and mothers are a very essential part of the whole development process in any setting. They say you educate a mother, you actually educate the whole family, you transform communities. And so what happens is over the years, most of our development conversations and most of the development processes have actually engaged women in this whole conversation. But what often happens is that men, and often adolescent boys, are excluded from the conversation. And we think that ultimately society in its natural form has men and women in equal proportion. And it is important to engage men as well in this whole process. Because at the end of the day, power still remains with the men. Several studies have shown that despite high degrees of economic empowerment of women, social empowerment doesn't naturally follow. There is very poor correlation. And so there is a need for the people who have the power to be engaged in the development conversation. And so we did a couple of men care model studies together with certain models that we have called Family Forum in a place called, in Agra, in a few of our ADPs around Agra. And we found that this has worked really well. And we have found that the whole incidents of abuse, incidents of alcoholism, incidents of different kinds of challenges that they have actually come down. So much so that we are today implementing this in about 30 of our area programs, so that you have the appropriate scale by involving men in the conversation. And the last product that I'll talk about is about improving education. We talked a little bit about education in schools. And we decided that ultimately we could come out with a simple product which will try and meet one of the biggest needs of our country, which is how do you improve education outcomes for children. Most of the annual school surveys show that our learning outcomes, Indian children are at least 2 or 3 grades behind their classes where they ought to be. A child of 5 finds it very hard, many children find it very hard to do a problem which a child from class 2 should be able to do very easily. A child of class 8 cannot read a 5th standard reader, even in their own vernacular languages. And so if it is possible for us to deal with primary school children in government schools, focusing only on government schools, because our focus is always on the most vulnerable child, what is it that we can do as an intervention to improve learning outcomes? So we developed a particular learning intervention package, including a very strong component of digital education to see this result. And in some of our schools in Chennai, we've actually seen remarkable results, so much so that now this is still at a point where it has not scaled up so significantly, but still we have seen that in the month of February and March, when the principals of the school normally go into the community and try and recruit young children, because the tendency is for children, or for people once they move up the economic ladder, to actually send their children to private schools, they've actually seen the trend reverse. That instead of the principals having to go and recruit children from the slum communities, they found that there is a huge demand for people wanting to take their children out of public schools and get them back into the government school system. So this is some of the things that we have been able to do. And like I said, at the end of the day, to my mind, innovation is about also simplicity and being able to find the simplest and sometimes the most obvious solution for challenges that we have in the social sector. Thank you.